So my topic tonight is nuclear power. And that brings me to my main claim. Nuclear power has significant advantage over other forms of energy. Let me define nuclear power. A form of energy produced by an atomic reaction capable of producing an alternative source of electrical power to that supplied by coal, gas, or oil. Now this brings me to my justifications for my main claim. CO2 emissions have significantly decreased as a result of nuclear power production. So to put that in context, nuclear power plants have prevented the emission of 64 gigatons of carbon dioxide, and these tons of carbon dioxide come from coal and gas plants, mainly. My second point is that nuclear energy production has prevented the buildings of hundreds of large coal-fired plants. So this means that because of nuclear power plant construction, it saves money for coal and gas power plants not being built, and it's cleaner energy. This brings me to a lot of points that people make how radiation from nuclear plants is dangerous. The dangers of nuclear energy are actually insignificant compared to the dangers we face day by day. So to support this, I'm going to bring up the Rasmussen study. Mr. Rasmussen was a scientist, and the study explained that within 25 miles of every nuclear site in the US, there are 4,200 fatalities by car versus 2 fatalities due to nuclear reactor accidents. And this study is day by day. And this was taken from a sample of 15 million people. So that kind of shows how accurate the study is. Even though it's still a sample, it was a very, very large sample. And people may say, oh, radiation is dangerous, it's bad for you, it can cause cancer, it can cause all these things. But radiation from US nuclear power plants is less than the natural background radiation. To define natural background radiation, it means that everything around us emits radiation. So that projector, per se, or that camera, per se, emits more radiation than these nuclear power plants. To give you specific numbers, our bodies themselves produce about 40 mREMs per year, and an mREM is a millirem. That is a measurement used to measure each particle of radiation coming out of us. This comes from potassium-40, which emits radiation passively. And as I said before, nuclear power plants only emit 1 mREM per year. So a nuclear power plant produces less radiation than we do ourselves individually. So that kind of shows how these claims that some people make are completely false. And on to my third justification for my main claim. Nuclear power is less damaging to the environment than other forms of electrical production. And I covered this earlier, but I'll cover it a little bit more in detail. So coal plants specifically produce on average 125,000 tons of ash and 193,000 tons of sludge per year. And these are gone into landfills and the ocean specifically, which hurt a bunch of ecosystems. And individual nuclear power plants produce about 2 cubic meters of nuclear waste material per year, which is then cured through a process called verification. And to explain that, verification is what we do to the wasted nuclear rods that we use to supply us with energy. It makes it into a glass-like substance that it's literally 2 cubic meters, and they put it in radioactive shielding and they bury it somewhere in the desert. This information comes from a book called The Nuclear Energy Option, written by Bernard Cohen, who's a professor at the Emeritus of Physics at Pittsburgh University. And that supports both of these topics because they both came from this book. And I'd like to go back to my previous statement of the Rasmussen study. I have a quote from another book that says, the major objections to nuclear power center on health and safety, but as the Rasmussen study suggests, These are precisely the areas in which nuclear power scores the highest grades. For example, a dam failure killing thousands of people occurs every 80 years or so. According to the Rasmussen study, a nuclear accident of that magnitude would occur around once in a million years. A million years with plants of US design. So, to conclude, nuclear power plants are indeed safer, and the sources I cited are all known authors and scientists. And one of them is actually an atmospheric physicist. So, there you go. Thank you.
All right, Jacob, the proposition's clearly identified. There's not really a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be. You dive right into making the argument. On the first point, you start presenting some factual data about the amount of carbon dioxide that gets removed from the atmosphere or keeps it, being out of the atmosphere. And then later on, when you get to the third point, there's talk about the ash and sludge that's going on. And I know that you got this information from someplace, but there's no citation, and this is just basic factual data, so it ought to be something that's pretty easy to cite. And there's a lot of stuff in this that is a little problematic. You rely primarily on the Rasmussen report and Cohen to give you credibility on those things. The Rasmussen report, I don't know if it's an ongoing process, but I know that the original Rasmussen report is over 40 years old now, and if there have been changes in the last 40 years in the nuclear industry, if there have been accidents or variations in the way nuclear power is used, if we're dependent on different storage systems, for instance, I think that would be the place that would represent some particular threats. The comparison about radiation, I don't know that that's the big risk that most people are worried about, living next door to a nuclear power plant and getting exposed to radiation that way. I'm not sure that that's what people are concerned about. They're more concerned with the issues of long-term storage of spent fuel and security and transporting that, for instance. And then, also the question of accidents at the plants. Now, the accidents at the plant you did talk about, and you had a good piece of risk information from the original Rasmussen study, so I thought that was pretty good. Again, no dates on those kinds of things. Cohen is an emeritus professor, apparently, so I think I've heard that name before. Again, I'm not sure when Cohen's testimony was being offered, and that should be something that should be cited in the presentation. The supporting points are numbered and signposted, although it did seem to me like you had two number 3 supporting points, and that one of those supporting points basically repeated the first claim, so there's a little bit of confusion there. Like I said, I think you need to cite the sources a little bit more consistently. There's a lot of you suggest that the ash and sludge, for instance, is potentially problematic to the environment, but there's no explanation of that. There's no demonstration of any particular harm. And if you're supposed to be doing a comparison to the nuclear waste, for instance, the only thing that you compared is the volume of this material, not the dangerousness of that material. And I think that's a little bit problematic. All right, thank you.